Welcome to a story that begins with longing, hesitation, and a connection powerful enough to change two lives forever. This is the journey of Aira and Zayden, two people who never expected to fall, yet found themselves pulled toward each other with a force neither could escape. My name is Aira, and if anyone had told me that the life I kept so carefully organized, every object placed precisely where it belonged, every routine followed with almost obsessive discipline, every moment calculated to avoid chaos, would eventually collide with the complicated, unpredictable fortune that is Zayden, I would never have believed them, because for years he represented everything I tried to avoid. Sharp edges, cold silences, impossible standards, and a gaze that made people straighten their backs as if standing under a spotlight. Yet from the moment I met him on my first day at the company, something inside me reacted in a way I didn't understand, not attraction, not admiration, but an unsettling awareness, like my heartbeat skipped half a second whenever he walked into the room, though back then I convinced myself it was just intimidation, nothing more, especially after that awful day 2 years ago when I presented my idea with so much hope and certainty, my voice steady, my hands carefully prepared, only for him to stand up in the middle of the room and cut me down with a cold "this won't work," leaving me exposed and embarrassed in front of everyone, fighting the sting in my eyes as I sat back down, my chest tight with humiliation. And from that day onward I built a wall around myself, a thick, carefully mortared barrier designed specifically to keep him out, refusing to let someone like him have the power to make me feel small again. But fate has a strange sense of humor, because the very man I wanted to avoid became the one I had to sit across from every single day when the company assigned us to a major project together. At first, we barely spoke, communicating only through clipped emails and short nods, the room filled with nothing but the quiet clicking of keyboards and the soft hum of the lights. And I told myself this was good, this was safe, this was controlled. But things started to change the night I pushed myself too far, my eyes burning as I stared at the screen, my head pounding, the pressure of deadlines squeezing every last drop of energy out of me. And I didn't even notice when he got up and left the room until he returned with 2 cups of chai and a small packet of cookies, placing one cup gently beside me without meeting my eyes, saying in a low voice I had never heard from him before, "You've been working nonstop. Take a break." And something in me cracked at that simple gesture, something I had spent 2 years keeping locked away, because in that moment he wasn't the cold boss who humiliated me, or the intimidating presence I avoided. He was just a man, tired like me, trying in his own quiet way to take care of someone he had hurt once and hadn't forgotten. After that night, the rhythm between us changed without either of us acknowledging it. The silence no longer cold but warm, almost comfortable, the space between our chairs feeling smaller even though nothing physically moved, and every time he stood close enough for me to feel the heat of his body, or every time our hands brushed when we reached for the same document, a strange rush went through me, quick and sharp, like my skin remembered something my mind refused to admit, and the tension built slowly, day by day, threading itself through our interactions, subtle but undeniable, until one evening the client unexpectedly rejected our work. And while I felt myself sinking under the weight of failure, convinced I had ruined everything again, Zayden stepped forward in the meeting with a fierce steadiness I had never seen from him, taking full responsibility without hesitation, defending me with a force that stunned everyone in the room, especially me. And when I confronted him afterward, asking why he did that, he looked at me with something raw and vulnerable in his eyes before saying, "Because it wasn't your fault, and because I won't let anyone speak to you the way I did that day." His voice low, almost pained, and that was the night everything between us shifted into something deeper, something magnetic, something dangerous but irresistible, because when we stayed late working to fix the proposal, surrounded by scattered papers and half-finished ideas, he finally admitted that the day he dismissed my idea 2 years ago, he wasn't thinking clearly, that he had panicked because I walked into the company with a brilliance and confidence that rattled him, making him feel things he didn't want to feel for someone he barely knew, and instead of dealing with those emotions like a sane human being, he buried them under coldness and harshness, hurting me in ways he regretted every single day after. And hearing him say those words shook me deeply, breaking apart the image I had created of him, revealing someone flawed, human, messy, someone who made terrible mistakes, but cared enough to admit them. And from that night onward, the air between us felt charged, every glance lingering, every conversation thick with unspoken words, every accidental touch sending small shocks through my body, until I found myself thinking about him when I wasn't supposed to, wondering what his smile looked like when he wasn't holding back, wondering how his voice sounded when he wasn't trying to stay professional, wondering how it would feel to be close to him, really close in ways that terrified me because I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. Yet the more I tried to resist, the more my heart betrayed me. The breaking point came the day he asked me to meet him for coffee outside of work, standing by my desk with his hands slightly trembling, as if the question itself made him nervous, and the moment I said yes, something in both of us shifted permanently, as though we had stepped onto a path we could never step off again. Because when I walked into that cafe and saw him sitting by the window with sunlight touching the side of his face, my breath caught in my throat in a way I couldn't hide. And when he saw me, the soft, slow smile that spread across his lips was the kind that made my chest feel tight, like he had been waiting for me longer than he wanted to admit. And our conversation was so natural, so easy, spilling from topic to topic without hesitation, filled with laughter that loosened something deep inside me, filled with glances that held far more meaning than the words we were speaking. And by the time we stepped outside into the evening air, my heart was beating too fast, too loud, especially when he stopped walking, turned toward me and whispered, "Can I see you again?" with a nervous tension that made him look almost boyish, and instead of answering with words, I stepped closer, just a few inches, but enough to feel the warmth of his breath on my skin, and said, "I want to," watching his eyes darken slightly as though the world had just tilted beneath his feet. And from that moment onward something changed between us, something neither of us had the courage to name, but both of us felt in the tightening of our chests whenever our eyes met, in the lingering silence after our conversations ended, in the way he would walk a little slower beside me, as if trying to make the moment last just a bit longer. And over the next weeks that quiet pull between us grew stronger, more deliberate, woven through every subtle gesture, every low-voiced exchange in the office hallway, every time his hand brushed mine as we passed each other a document, sending sparks up my arm that left me breathless for minutes afterward, because there was a hunger in the space between us, a growing, simmering tension that neither of us dared act on, but both of us fed with every stolen glance and every soft laugh we shared during late-night work sessions. And it all came to a breaking point on one particular evening when we had stayed far too late, the office nearly empty, the city lights glowing through the big windows behind him as he leaned over my desk to read something on my screen, his hand resting on the table dangerously close to mine, his breath warm against my cheek, and I felt my entire body tighten with an ache I couldn't hide, an ache that made me close my eyes for half a second because the heat radiating from him was overwhelming. And when I opened them, he was already watching me, his gaze heavy, dark, filled with something that made my pulse stutter, and before either of us could speak, he whispered, "Aira, if I don't step back right now, I won't be able to stop." His voice strained, rough, as though holding himself together took every ounce of strength he had, and instead of stepping away, I whispered back, "Then don't." The words slipping out before I could stop them, raw and honest and trembling with everything I had been fighting for weeks, and the moment he heard them, something inside him snapped, not in a violent way, but in a way that felt like a dam breaking, months of restraint shattering all at once, because he closed the distance between us so slowly, so deliberately, giving me every second to pull away, and when I didn't, when I tilted my face just slightly toward him, He let out a shaky breath as if finally surrendering to something he had been denying for far too long, and then his lips met mine in a kiss that wasn't gentle or patient but fierce, urgent, full of every unsaid feeling, every hidden desire, every moment we had spent pretending we didn't want this. His hands framed my face, warm and steady, pulling me closer with a need that made my heart race so fast it almost hurt, and I kissed him back with equal intensity, my fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt like I was afraid he might disappear if I didn't hold on tight enough. And for a long moment the world collapsed into nothing but the taste of him, the warmth of him, the way his breath caught every time I pressed closer, the way he whispered my name like a secret he had been waiting years to confess. And by the time we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together, everything between us had changed forever. After that night, nothing felt uncertain anymore, not the way he reached for my hand when we walked together, not the way he leaned down to whisper something soft against my ear when no one was watching, not the way he would look at me during meetings with a quiet intensity that made my stomach flutter because I knew exactly what he was thinking, what he was remembering, what he wanted, and even though we didn't rush into anything reckless, there was a deep magnetic pull that drew us closer with every passing day, a pull that made every moment feel charged, every touch feel electric, every stolen kiss feel like a promise of something bigger, something neither of us could fully articulate yet, but both of us felt growing like a flame between our ribs. And one night, after a long, emotionally exhausting day at work, when I was sitting on a bench outside the office, staring at the city lights and trying to steady my breathing, he sat beside me without saying a word, simply taking my hand in his, our fingers intertwining naturally, like they were meant to fit that way all along. And after a long, quiet moment, he whispered, "I don't want to hide this anymore." His thumb brushing gently against my knuckles, sending shivers up my arm. And even though I knew the risks, knew the complications, knew the lines we were crossing, I also knew that the way he looked at me wasn't something temporary or fragile or impulsive. It was real, grounded, steady, and when I whispered, "Neither do I," he let out a soft exhale of relief, as if he had been waiting desperately for those exact words, and he pulled me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist, his forehead resting against the side of my head as he murmured, "Aira, I'm falling for you." The confession trembling with sincerity, and hearing those words made my chest feel warm and tight, because even though I had known, even though I had felt it in every touch and every look he gave me, hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that scared me and comforted me at the same time. And I turned toward him, lifting his chin gently so he would look at me, and whispered, "I'm falling too." Watching the way his eyes softened, the way his lips parted slightly as if the words hit him deeper than he expected, and he leaned in and kissed me again, slower this time, more deliberate, filled with emotion instead of urgency, a kiss that felt like a vow, a beginning, a promise of something neither of us could step away from now, that it had finally been spoken. And that small, unexpected gesture made something deep in my chest tremble, because for the first time I realized how terrifyingly easy it had become for him to reach me, how quickly my defenses fell whenever he was near, and maybe that was why the days that followed felt like gravity had shifted, pulling us toward each other with a force neither of us fully understood, because every stolen glance in the hallway held a question we weren't brave enough to ask. Every brush of his hand against mine left heat that stayed long after he walked away, and every late night conversation through text turned into confessions neither of us expected to share, slowly peeling away the layers we hid from the world, until the night he called me and simply said he needed to see me, and I found myself standing outside his door with a heart that beat too loudly, not knowing if I was ready for what waited on the other side. Yet the moment he opened it, his eyes told me everything words never could, soft but burning, hesitant but wanting. And before I could speak, he stepped closer, lifting a hand to my cheek like he was asking for permission without saying a sound. But I didn't move away. I didn't breathe. I just stood there caught in the gravity of him, and when his thumb brushed under my jaw, I felt something inside me dissolve, something held tight for too long, and he whispered my name, Aira, in a voice that carried every restrained feeling finally slipping free, and I knew then that whatever line we had been pretending not to see had already been crossed the moment we began falling for each other. So when he moved closer and rested his forehead against mine, the warmth of his breath mingling with mine, I felt my world narrow to the space between us, to the weight of everything unspoken, and I whispered that I was scared, not because of him but because of how much he suddenly meant to me, and instead of pulling away, he cupped my face with both hands and murmured that he'd never rush me, never push, that whatever we were building didn't need to move faster than my heartbeat, but the way he looked at me said he hoped, quietly, fiercely, that I'd choose him anyway, and in that moment I did, not with words but with the way my fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him close enough that my breath caught when his arms wrapped around me, strong and warm and certain, holding me like he'd been waiting for that single moment longer than he would ever admit. And the rest of the night blurred into soft lights, whispered confessions, slow breaths shared in the quiet of his living room, where we sat pressed together on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, my head against his chest, listening to a heartbeat that felt far steadier than mine. And even though nothing happened beyond the warmth of that closeness, the intimacy of it felt deeper than anything physical ever could, because for the first time in years I felt safe, seen, wanted, and he kept brushing his fingers softly through my hair like he couldn't help touching me, like letting go would break something delicate between us, until I finally whispered that I didn't want to leave, and he whispered back that he didn't want me to go, but he also didn't want to give me a reason to regret anything in the morning, so we stayed like that, quiet, tangled, breathing the same slow rhythm, until sleep pulled us under, and when I woke up hours later, wrapped in his arms with the sunrise touching his face, I felt something shift inside me, something irreversible, because seeing him like that, peaceful and unguarded, made my chest soften in ways I wasn't ready for but couldn't deny, and maybe he felt it too, because the moment his eyes opened and landed on me, a small, tired smile curved his lips, the kind someone gives only to a person their heart has already chosen, and he whispered, "Good morning," like a secret he was sharing only with me, and I realized then that whatever we had stepped in to was no longer something either of us could pretend away. So when he asked, quietly, gently, if I'd let him take me out properly that evening, my yes came out without hesitation, natural as breathing. Because by then my walls had already crumbled, my fears had already loosened, and the rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. I tried to hide, but failed miserably, especially when my phone buzzed with a message from him saying he couldn't stop thinking about last night, and that one line stayed in my head the entire time I got ready, choosing a dress I had never been brave enough to wear before, feeling nervous excitement coil in my stomach as I made my way to meet him. And when I saw him waiting for me, leaning against his car, eyes lighting up the second they found mine, I knew there was no turning back, because the look on his face wasn't the cold, unreadable stare from months ago. It was warm, hungry, and impossibly tender all at once, and the moment I reached him he stepped close, letting his gaze trail slowly over me in a way that made heat flutter up my neck, telling me quietly that I looked beautiful, not as flirtation but like a truth he had been holding in. And the dinner that followed felt like peeling open new layers of him, hearing pieces of his past he rarely shared with anyone, learning the small things that shaped the man he was. And every time our hands brushed across the table, a spark shot straight through me, until finally, on the walk back to the car, he stopped, took my hand fully, intertwined our fingers, and looked at me with a seriousness that made my breath hitch as he said he wanted more. More nights like this, more mornings, more moments where I let him in instead of pushing him away, and that he didn't want anything between us to be temporary, and my heart, already soft from everything he had shown me, broke open at the honesty in his voice, so I stepped closer, placed my hand against his chest, felt his heartbeat stutter under my palm, and told him I wanted more too, wanted him, wanted whatever we were building even if it scared me, and the way he exhaled, shaky and full of relief, made warmth bloom inside me. And then, finally, he leaned in, slow enough to let me pull away if I wanted, giving me every second to change my mind, but I didn't. And when our lips touched, it felt like the world fell away, like everything we had held back for months finally ignited. And his hand slid to my waist with a tenderness that contrasted the intensity of the kiss, holding me as though I was something precious, something he had waited for far longer than he'd admit. And when we finally pulled apart, breathless and shaken in the best way, he pressed his forehead to mine again, the same way he had that first night, and whispered that he didn't want this moment to ever end. And for the first time in my life, I felt the same. Thank you for stepping into Aira and Zayden's world. Their journey doesn't end here. It simply opens the door to new beginnings, deeper love, and the promise of a future shaped by the moments that brought them together.